Hello all, and welcome back to a new episode of TV and Us, a conversation show about the TV series we just can't stop talking about. My name is Jennifer Hahn.
And I'm Sarah Callan.
And each season, we focus on a different show, reviewing it episode by episode, and we invite you to watch along with us. Right now, we are reviewing Dune Prophecy, and today we are on the penultimate episode of this season, episode 5, titled In Blood, Truth. If you haven't watched it yet, this is your spoiler alert. Please check out the episode before continuing to listen to the rest of our conversation. Okay, Sarah, kick us off with a summary for episode 5.
While Tula tries to keep her secret project from being discovered by the other sisters, Desmond goes on a warpath to root out insurgents.
That he does. Which is perfect for him.
Oh, yeah.
I was like, this is terrible for the galaxy, but great for me, getting to watch him flex all of his toxic strength.
Oh, yeah. He's having a great time.
I think so.
Just
fun.
having a ball out here destroying people's lives.
It's another day, another Tuesday.
Yeah, no big deal.
Okay, well, let's start off with our episode titles for this 5th episode. Sarah, what is yours?
Mine is Ferocity and Pride.
Yeah. There's a lot of that. My episode title is Lineage.
Yeah, we learn about the lineage of a few people in this episode.
Yeah, I'm upset. I hate it. But we'll get into that.
Oh my gosh, it's so good. Yeah, there was a part of this episode where I booed my TV.
I love that. Yes. Yes.
I figured that this was coming, but I was still upset by it.
Oh, yeah. Okay, well, let's air all of our grievances. This is what this is for. This is therapy for us to get our feelings out. Sarah, tell me your high-level thoughts about episode 5.
I'm struggling with this show.
It's downhill from episode 2 onwards for you.
But the previous episode was so good.
Yeah.
And so I was like, oh my gosh, is this just like the opposite trajectory of most shows where you like start off weak and then you end really strong? I was like, man, are we on an upward trajectory? This is cool. Nope. We just had a little blip of joy in the 4th episode. And now we're kind of back to just like, oh, it's fine. And I've been trying to figure out like why this show isn't working for me, because there's a lot of good here, and you can tell that a lot of talent went into creating these episodes, and like set design, costume design is great. I appreciate some of like the editing and the directing choices. The performances are good. Like there's a lot of good stuff here, but I really think that the story is a little unfocused and bit off more than it can chew. And so for me, I think in this episode, everything is so separate that it just felt like we were back to like, oh, there's just these different factions, but they don't cleanly relate to each other. Where in the previous episode, we learned what Valia was doing and what Desmond was doing, and then it came to a head in the episode. So these two sides were very connected in a very real way that made for a really satisfying conflict. Whereas in this episode, stuff happens, but we're back to that it all being separate again. And so I'm just kind of like, okay, that's cool. There's some interesting thoughts and ideas, but I wonder if this story had been maybe a little narrower in scope, if maybe it would be more effective, and then I could really connect to these characters a bit more and be more invested in the story and where it's going.
Yeah, I think that's a great summary. This show is definitely biting off more than it can chew. And what's so interesting is I feel like we had that feeling at the beginning of this journey in episode 1. We're like, wow, this is a lot of characters. Yeah. I don't know if they can do it. Episode 2, okay, maybe there's a little bit of hope. By episode 3, I was like, I don't think they can do it. Episode 4, like you mentioned, you and I were both really like, they could really land this plane and weave all of these intersecting storylines together in an incredible way. And I think in our last episode, I said, man, I might need to eat my words that I was skeptical about the show being able to do this interweaving. And I take that back. I'm eating those words. A lot of eating words inception happening here because I don't think they can do it. Especially this being the penultimate episode. I mean, theoretically, we should have a clear idea of at least where roughly this might be going and what the main tensions are. And I think this is still kind of a hot mess, and we only have a little bit of runway left. My biggest problem that I think is indicative of the show's like judgment overall on the storytelling is we have introduced a whole new character in this episode with Francesca. And I'm like, y'all, this is far too late in the game for this to carry weight. And you know that the concept is really interesting of this emperor who has these torn loyalties. I mean, there's a lot of like relational strife that can happen from that with these two women feeling in competition with each other. There's some really great things you can weave in around the Ben Gesserit and their kind of genetic modification manipulation. So it makes sense why she exists. But I think that was supposed to be a dramatic reveal. I didn't find it very dramatic. I was just like, what? We're getting a whole new character on episode 5. And I think she seems to be playing potentially quite a big role in how this is all going to play out. Constantine's definitely seeming like his arc is only just beginning. And I'm like, y'all, his arc needed to start like at least episode 2 for this to really land the plane well. So I think that is pretty indicative of the fact that the show's intuition around how to weave and tee up storylines and then satisfyingly, you know, wrap them up well is pretty indicative of that decision and that choice. It makes sense. It's just too late in the game.
Yeah, and with Francesca comes this new concept of imprinting as well. And so I think that's the other thing, because in the previous episode we saw Theodosia's special skill of, you know, becoming the other person or becoming a lookalike or whatever, doppelganger. And then in this one, we're introduced to the concept of imprinting. And so it's so late, and now we're being introduced to these new concepts with only one episode to pay it off. Like, what are we doing here, folks? And I think my maybe bigger issue going into the last episode is, what are we even doing? Like,
no idea.
What is the story here? It's literally just people wanting to either get or maintain power is kind of how I would summarize this. But even though there's this central conflict between Valia and Desmond, it's kind of hazy, and we know it's going to be bad if Desmond can do whatever it is that he wants to do. But we don't have specifics. So the threat is kind of not real. And then it's, at least for me, I'm struggling to see Valia as the protagonist. So I'm like, what if Desmond just does his thing? Because Valia, you're kind of jacked up too. So is what he's bringing worse than what you've already brought? So going into the final episode, I'm like, I don't even know who I'm rooting for anymore, except for Michaela. I only want good things for her, and I'm 1000% rooting for her. But I think everybody else, I'm just kind of like, what are we doing? I don't understand what we're moving toward, which is a real big bummer because we have one episode left. So presumably we're going to find out in the last episode, but I walked away from episode 5 going, like, what is the point of this show? What is the goal?
Well, I think you bring up a great point around, like, okay, yes, everyone's fighting for power, but why? What are their motivations? How are they planning to do that? I think that's all still pretty unclear as well. And there's just so many characters that still have very disparate goals. And I think by this point in the show, there needs to be some uniting of teams together that are maybe aligning their goals, but they have now a shared objective. So a great example of this, which I think makes a lot of sense, and the show's been teeing up the Natalia and Desmond alliance for quite a while. So that makes sense to me. But I think there's so many more pockets of people that are just doing their own thing. Tula's off doing whatever the heck she wants to do with Lila, and that's not intersected at all. The Atreides Swordmaster, again, has kind of an objective, but not sure what the goal is there. He's not really aligned with Inez. I don't know what he's doing. He's kind of floating. So there's too many game pieces on the board that are all still very stratified in their objectives, which is fine for like opening exposition, maybe even middle game, but we're in the end game here. And so I think some of them need to have formed stronger shared goals. Even if their individual goals are not aligned, at least they see that there's alignment together. And now let's fight against each other. So at least we have 3 or 4 factions, but instead we have like 17 different people each doing their own thing and causing chaos. And I think that's also, making the show feel a little less focused in its primary conflict and tension. So I think that's also a problem that the show is facing right now.
Yeah, and I think it kind of goes back to how our human brains work, and we like clarity and order. And I feel like even in storytelling, you need to have these bits of order so that our brains can process through what's going on. Obviously, there's a place for chaos, and that creates some wonderful tension. But I feel like this whole show has just been everybody kind of on their own. And there's been no, like you said, there's been no reordering of people. So we don't really know who we're rooting for. So then that limits my investment in the show because I'm not aligned to anybody. I'm just kind of watching all of these people do these different things for some reason, and we'll kind of see what happens, maybe. So I wish that the show had maybe pared down a little bit and focused on a smaller number of characters, because then we could really invest in them and we could know their motivations and their goals and all of these things. And I think the show, I think that Valia and then Tula and Desmond are probably like our main 3, but even them, I'm like, what are we doing, folks? Like, I don't know. And now we're spending so much time on all of these other side characters and taking away from our main 3 that I don't know. I just want to check out because there's just too much going on. I'm not invested in anybody. And I really don't care what happens. I'm like, okay, if Desmond wins, cool, because then the show's over. Like, that's fine with me. As long as Michaela gets out okay and the Fremen are okay, then I'm happy. Which is probably not the goal of the show, but like, yeah. I'm rooting for the Fremen. That's my line, and that is where I've come to, and I kind of don't care about almost anybody else. Some of the acolytes are cool, and I want them to be okay, but yeah, I don't super care about our main characters and whatever they're doing in this world.
Yeah, which is like prerequisite for being invested in the show. I feel like this show is like one big brainstorming session in the writer's room of what a Dune Prophecy Ben Gesserit show could be. Like, we've got so many great ideas. Love all of them. They're so interesting, but we have to choose some, so I feel like I'm looking at essentially a giant board with sticky notes on it of all these different ideas, and they're all individually great, but the show keeps adding more and more sticky to the board. And I think we need to just say, y'all, we need to go forward with these 2 to 3 ideas and do them really, really well, because everything is interesting. I think that's the other problem, is that all of the concepts and themes and characters in this show are all individually very exciting, very interesting, would make great television. We're just not really having time to explore all of them. So, the acolytes, you mentioned the acolytes. There's been this whole tee up in the previous episode of kind of internal divisions within the acolytes and how they believe ideologically the sisterhood should be run, shouldn't be run, some of the choices that are making there. That's a whole show right there, you know? So I think there's too many concepts. We needed to have chosen some instead of put all of our brainstormed ideas together. But my one other thought related to that is to a point that you made in one of our previous conversations, which is this kind of the springboard for like the Duneverse? And is that why the show feels really overstuffed? Because we're going to take some of these characters and do dedicated shows and side plots with them. And so maybe that's why there's so many people and concepts being introduced, because this is kind of the root seed of, 6 other shows that are going to come out of this. I don't know, but that would make maybe a little bit more sense to me on why some of these choices are being made, because this breaks a lot of the natural conventions that I think we would typically think about for what makes great television that you'd expect, writers to have in mind.
Yeah, I think Dune Prophecy suffers from the same issue as the original Dune film from the 80s, where it just tried to do everything, and that's too much. And so these Denis Villeneuve version of Dune, obviously he split it into 2 parts, which is very smart, but it's focused, and it knows what pieces to really go into detail on and what pieces to just kind of leave in the background. And I feel like Dune Prophecy doesn't prioritize appropriately. And I feel like there's a way to potentially usher in the Duneverse by telling one story, but then introducing some side characters in a really interesting and effective way without having to go into their whole story. So if this show is intended to spawn off all of these other shows, I feel like they set themselves up for failure, because this show is not as enjoyable as it could be. It's fine, which is a bummer because it's really well made, but I think the story is just such a letdown. And if the goal was to explore other parts of this universe, I think there's a better way to set those things up. But I don't know. We'll see what the powers that be will do with this story.
Yeah. I think it's not looking promising, given that we have one more episode left. There's just so much and too many concepts introduced. And I think originally in the first few episodes, I was a little bit more excited about the new concepts that were being introduced for us to play with. That concept of being a shapeshifter, really interesting. The concepts with the thinking machines and Lila being hooked up and kind of using the life force from that, really interesting. There's some really cool places that could go. One of the things that I hated about this episode is the reveal that Desmond is the son of a Bene Gesserit sister, and now potentially that's informing some of his choices around wanting to seek revenge and whatnot. I feel like that concept is so overdone in a lot of our big franchise movies these days. The Star Wars universe really beat that one over the head with like, everybody is the child of their perceived foe at the given moment, and they have to reconcile their family roots and, battle that within themselves of finding out who they are, but then embracing this new identity as well. It's so overdone, and I hated that whole backstory for him. I wanted him to just be kind of this agent of chaos that was chosen by Shai Hulud and is here to wreak some havoc, and it can be as simple as that. That is already very interesting. We didn't have to do this whole family line backstory thing.
Yeah, it's so silly. Like we didn't need that. And if in episode 6 there's a moment where Tula comes rushing in because now she's learned that Desmond is her son, and then they have this like either reconciliation or he kills his mom, I'm going to be upset either way, because this is some foolishness that I am not here for. He is so much more interesting as, just like you said, an agent of chaos. That's so much more fun. Just a random dude, a random nobody. And that would be so interesting because he has these powers that Valia doesn't understand and can't account for. And so if he came from nowhere, from no family line of note, and just bloop, popped up, that would be so fascinating and would really mess her up because she's just seeking to control and game everything. And it would be fun if he truly was an agent of chaos that just messed everything up and foiled her perfect plans. And then it would be cool to see how she reacts to something like that, as opposed to he is Harkonnen and Atreides. And it's the most...
What they're going to do, though. I would
it's
bet
the most
so much money on
straightforward.
that.
It's so annoying to me. Like, can we just get a little more creative and do something a little off the wall here? Ugh, it's fine.
I mean, it's like we've done that already, and it was interesting. You know what I mean? We did that way back when with I Am Your Father, and that was mind-blowing, exciting to think about. And I think that my other problem with this is that because there's so many stories that are put to the big screen now around like your family line being so significant and being kind of almost unintentionally communicating that that's like where your source of power comes from because you came from a powerful family. I think it's a kind of like, I don't know, just a more boring message, you know, of like, because you came from something, therefore that's enabling you more than everybody else. Like, why not just he amassed power because he could, and he was a nobody, but he was able to make himself somebody and wreak chaos in the Imperium. That's fun. Why does it have to be connected to your family line? You know, I think that we've beat that one so much over the head that I'm like, all right, we can just have nobodies be really powerful too, guys. Like, it doesn't have to stem from somewhere. And if anything, a nobody that has amassed power and figured out how to train and use that power well is more impressive than it being like, well, you were born with like greatness that was inherent in your genetics.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And because the Bene Gesserit is so focused on genetics and making sure that all of these lines intertwine to produce the right person, blah, 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 blah. It would be so much more satisfying if he was a nobody.
Mm-hmm.
But
yep.
Here we are.
Yep.
Choices have been made.
And what's his face? Borean? No, I don't remember. One of the Atreides. I forget his name. The one that...
I don't remember.
They literally showed a flashback of it, too. I'm like, do y'all think... Unless that's a misdirect, in which case I'm like, all right, a little bit more respect for you. That's great. But if Tula is his mother and the Atreides, that was her boyfriend at the time, the flashback, is the father, I'm like, y'all, do you think we're dumb? Like, of course that's gonna be our theory. You've showed it to us already, you know? Give us something we haven't seen before. But alas.
We will see, you know, something to watch out for.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep. Okay, other big things that happened in this episode that we want to talk about?
I mean, can we just talk about your girl Natalia for just a hot second?
Yeah, she's making some moves. Oh my.
She sure is.
Yeah, it's fitting for the character. I'm not too thrilled about it. She's almost like this like femme fatale in the Duneverse, which I kind of am fascinated by. She's definitely using and preying on Desmond and using her sexuality and, you know, that aspect of manipulation to receive favor and influence over him. So I don't know, like I'm not loving her as much as I used to. I thought it was really neat when she was just able to play the game by using the chips around her and the game pieces around her, but she's really going quite heavy on using a lot of the other aspects of and tools and levers in her toolbox to be able to gain influence, which I think is a fascinating choice for that character. She's definitely taken a left turn. It makes sense. We're nearing the end, so they're going to increase the tension, the stakes. So yeah, I feel a little bit more mixed about her now, not going to lie. I think they've been teeing up this Desmond-Natalia alliance, so kind of feels like it's coming, because something's coming to fruition that we were expecting the whole time anyway.
Yeah, and this is in line with this show just like dropping things into our lap and then just like quickly moving on. But that line that she says about like she was originally sent to like bring the Imperium forward into the future or whatever. And I'm like, that's fascinating. Like, can we just scrap a lot of this other stuff and just learn about Natalia and what she is going through and what her mission was, and then the Bene Gesserit come in and mess it all up? Like, that would have been an interesting story in and of itself, and making the Bene Gesserit, you could make both Natalia and the Bene Gesserit these kind of like, are they a hero or are they the anti-hero kind of thing, and they're both playing in this morally gray area. Like, that could be an entire show and would probably be more interesting than what we got. So when she said that line, I was like, hold on, that's the show that I want. As opposed to this. What are we doing here, folks? So that was one of those moments in this episode where I was like, well, what we got for the Bene Gesserit was not really what I wanted. I wanted more of that like scheming, planning, political business and cunning and all of that, coming up against a foe that is just equally as cunning and moves and counter moves and all of that. And this is more... There's some like soap opera elements to this family drama business as opposed to like political cunning that I really wanted.
Yeah. So I feel like episode 4 was that little crumb
so
we could
good.
hold on to. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I wonder if the show will do a misdirect like that, though. Like, one of the theories that I have that hopes that I have that I think could be really interesting is if Desmond's not actually the Reckoning. Like, they think that he is, but he's actually not, and Natalia is the one. Because from the beginning, she has such a hatred and animosity of the sisterhood, and her power is clearly continuing to grow and rise over the course of this season. And we're seeing that there's very real limitations and weaknesses within Desmond that are being revealed from the previous episode to this one. And so he is potentially just a game piece that's being used by her, but that she is the ultimate source of whatever the Reckoning is, or this counter force against the sisterhood. And I think that would be really fun and interesting. I hope they do that, because maybe I'll feel a little bit more satisfied than I'm expecting to. But I think it would also be really great to see that the counter opposition to the Bene Gesserit is another woman who is also incredibly talented and sharp and cunning. And it's not this like male force that is just purely relying on strength, but that her scheming behind the scenes has rewarded her rise to power too.
I like that. I was hoping that Lila would be the Reckoning, because she is also the one that was twice born, and I think that there would be something interesting about the thing that you created ultimately being your downfall. I mean, I guess if Desmond is Tula's kid, then that also applies, but I don't know, it would be, because it would be like Frankenstein's monster turning on Frankenstein, you know, like that's interesting to me, and it would be a little more out there than like, oh, Desmond is the Reckoning. But I would be down if it's Natalia pulling his strings. That's cool too. Let's go. Come on, my girl. Let's start scheming. Let's make some things happen.
Yeah, I feel like it's not going to be, but I just like that concept of a show. But you're right. Lila being the Reckoning is also, I think, probably like a more plausible theory. I kind of hope that the concept of a Reckoning like doesn't even exist. Like, out of the paranoia and fear and like this prophecy that was spoken by Raquella, creating this like false sense of paranoia around every little decision and choice that is being made by those in their orbit, causing them to believe that there is a reckoning, and that the way that the fear and paranoia around that spreads makes it real. So it could be really in line with Denis Villeneuve's vision and interpretation of Paul potentially not really being the chosen one, but because the prophecy said it to be so, and they fanned the flames of that, like by default now he is, because whatever people believe is what is true. Like, the reckoning might not be real, but because they believe it, therefore it is true to them, you know, and now they're kind of self-destructing out of this over emphasis and desire to protect themselves from this force that doesn't even exist. I think that would be really cool too. And playing with this idea of what is truth, what is prophecy, what we believe in being true would be really fun.
Well, and that is also set up in this episode when Raquella, through Lila, discovers that it's a virus rooted in the amygdala, rooted in the fear center, and then just kind of spreads throughout. And so that would make sense if it was fear that is really the reckoning and is just causing that, and maybe that is like the fuel to Desmond's powers is fear. I don't know. That would be something really interesting. And the show has teased that up. And we even talked about it in the last episode, the way that Tula versus Desmond are responding to fear so differently. And if fear is the root of the reckoning, then that would explain the whole like fear is the mind killer thing that becomes the Ben Gesserit's kind of mantra, 10,000 years from now. So I think that's plausible. I think all the pieces are there for the show to go that route. I hope they do, because that would be far more interesting than any of the more straightforward options.
That would be really fun. I would love that if that was the ending of this show. It's like there was no reckoning at all, actually. Jokes on you. It was all in your mind anyway. And then perhaps, the sisterhood like really is nearly diminished, and maybe there's something with Jen in there in the middle of, because she doesn't have the nightmare, and like she is not afraid, and she is one of the first acolytes was kind of questioning like this sisterhood and kind of the blind loyalty that they have to the sisterhood, and this like, so maybe that's why she's not as impacted by the fear around the sisterhood falling apart, because she doesn't feel that same like identity with the sisterhood. But there's something there with her potentially leading the new vision of what the Ben Gesserit are into the future as everybody else self-destructs, and we get the new fear is a mind killer mantra, and it's this new like rebirth of the sisterhood emerges. I don't know. That'd be fun.
Yeah. I'm here for that. Like,
she's great.
Sister Jen has my vote. Yes. Like, let's go.
Love it. Okay, any other big things we wanted to mention before we give out some TVNS awards?
Did you want to talk about Francesca anymore? Or did we already air enough grievances about her?
Yeah, I think that her storyline is a whole nother show. And I think that the concept of her existing it makes a lot of sense. It's really interesting. It kind of mirrors a little bit of Duke Leto Atreides with Jessica, and it's kind of like love between the person in power and this Ben Gesserit that's sent there, that is not officially in power on the throne, but has influence through the romantic relationship between the two of them. I think they don't have time to explore it. Constantine's like not on my radar at all, but now he is, I guess, and is probably going to play some role in the finale. So yeah, I think I don't have anything else to share about Francesca. Great storyline, could be a whole show, but just not enough time for this one. What about you?
Yeah, when she showed up, I was questioning in my brain if, like, did I just get the number of episodes wrong in the season? Like, is this actually an 8-episode season? And I just, like, tricked my own brain to think it was 6? Because that would make sense. If this was supposed to be an 8-episode show, okay. She enters in episode 5. We still got a few episodes to figure out what's going on. She throws some, wrenches in. It would be interesting. But man, as the second to last episode, it's too late. Yep. There's just too much going on. Too many people, too many storylines. So it's wide in its scope, but it's not deep. And so Francesca shows up and she's out here just wreaking havoc in this house. And I'm like, okay, that's cool. Whatever. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not super invested in any of these folks. So, except for Natalia, she's pretty cool. So I feel bad for her, but she's scheming. So she's got it. She's going to be fine. But so I think because the show is, my attention is spread across way too many characters. When Francesca shows up, it's not this big gut punch. It's just like, oh, okay, there's another character here. Wow. Okay, another person to keep track of. Here we go.
You know that part in one of the Hamilton songs where all the dudes are like, "Who are you? Who are you? Who are you?" That's me when she shows up. I'm like, "Who are you? And where have you been? And why have you just arrived? The party's almost over. It is nearly like 10 p.m. We're about to go home, yo."
Yeah, she's fashionably late.
Yes.
Like.
Yeah. And the problem is, the new concepts they're introducing are all very interesting, you know. So I think that's the other thing. I'm like, man, that's really cool. That's a great idea. Not in this show. Save it for another show, y'all. Keep your sticky notes and make more television for us, but pick only a few, my dudes.
Yeah, we got too much going on here.
Yeah. It's a lot.
Gosh, what a bummer.
But we're heading to the finale, so it's all gonna have to get tied up somehow.
We'll see what they finally decide to prioritize, because I don't know, there doesn't seem to have been too much prioritization over the past 5 episodes. It's just kind of like a basket of all of these different storylines. So we'll see if we get another basket or if we see actually things resolve.
This might end up looking like my room after I'm done doing some Christmas gift wrapping, which is just like there's strips and scraps of ribbon everywhere, and like we haven't really made very many bows, you know? Like there's just scraps strewn about, ribbon everywhere. Hopefully we get one bow.
We will see. We will see next week.
Yep.
Will we get bows, or is it just scraps of paper?
Yep. Okay, let's give out some TVNS awards. The first category is for Best Sis. What's your choice?
Yeah, I want to give it to Mother Raquella for just using Lila as a puppet and doing her science stuff. It was great. I loved that.
Oh, yeah. That whole concept's so cool. It's so interesting.
It's so cool.
Oh, yeah. My choice for Best Sis is for Sister Jen for taking such great care of Lila. So tender, so kind. If I needed anybody by my side when I'm in a thinking machine, it would be Sister Jen.
Honestly, she is the MVP of this show. Like, she's killing it.
She's calling people out when they need to be called out.
Yeah.
She's tender and warm when she needs to be. She's observant when she needs to be. She's listening to that whole conversation between Tula and the other older woman. She's listening. So, yeah, she's great.
She's great. More of her, please.
Yep. The next category is Spiciest Moment. What's your choice?
Yeah, I want to give this to Michaela for taking out a goon and also blowing up all of her stuff and blowing up the dudes inside of her place.
Yep. She
was pretty awesome.
Great. Oh my gosh. Love watching her. I hope we get more of her. I hope she's just as alive, you know, by the end of the show.
Yes.
That'd be great.
Me too.
I am also giving this to Michaela, Sister Michaela, I guess now we can call her, for sticking her guns and just being like, well, yeah, sorry, dude, to Atreides Swordmaster. She's like, yeah, I betrayed you. I would do it again. So sorry.
Can we just, for a second.
That's amazing.
In that moment, Atreides has the guts to tell her, don't let me see you again. And in that moment, I was like, excuse you, sir. She is amazing. I need you to put your sword away and go away. I don't want to see you again. I want to see a lot more of her. I was so offended on her behalf for that comment that he made.
Well, especially because, as we see, Karma's a bitch, and it comes for him later because...
Yeah.
Plot twist, you're also betraying the people that you have built trust with. So you're not any better. You know what I mean? It could come from anybody else to be like, I don't want to see you again. But you know what it's like. You know what you got to do. Let's practice some empathy here, you know?
No, he's just going to be upset with his little sword.
Yep.
so annoyed. It's like, go away. And then he gets arrested next. And I was like, yes,
Yep.
you deserve it.
Most cutting line. What is your choice of dialogue?
I also want to give it to Michaela for when she says to Valia, I see you're molding this one in your image.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's an insult to both of them too, which is
it's
genius.
so good.
Yeah. I'm going to give this to Desmond when he's talking to Michaela about the smuggler he just killed, and he says, unfortunately for him, most of what he said was screaming.
It's so good. He's having so much fun in this episode, and it's just fun to watch him.
Yeah. I love that he pops himself up onto the bar just to sit back and watch and unfold. Oh, it's so good. It's great. He's really relishing in it, and I love that for him.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, looking ahead, what are we excited to see? What bows would you like to see?
I would like Michaela to be okay. I want the Fremen to be okay. I would like another moment of a sandworm. That would be lovely. I want I want Sister Jen to be okay, and some of the other acolytes. I want them to be okay. And that's kind of it.
Safety.
Like, I would like for them to stay alive, and everybody else, I'm kind of like, I don't really care what happens to you. Which is wrong. I should care about these characters, but
here we are.
Yeah, I kind of don't.
Yeah, it's telling when your primary concern is just for their safety and not really the plot.
Yeah, because what is the plot?
I don't know.
Like,
I don't know what anyone's fighting for anymore.
We just got people trying to get power and stop a reckoning, which we don't know what that is.
Yep.
And that's it.
Well, they have no idea what the reckoning is. They needed to figure out what the reckoning was by maybe episode 4, and then we can make a plan to stop the reckoning, and then the plan either is successful or it goes to shit, and either way, that's going to be fun for us. But we don't even know what it is yet. We're still in the information gathering phase. So we're just fighting blindly.
And I think that they think that it's Desmond, but like you said, there's not a plan.
Right.
So and they had a plan in episode 4 and it went wrong, and that was interesting.
Yeah.
But in this episode, we're back to not having a plan, and Valia isn't a central figure in this episode. So we're just following all of the tertiary characters as they're doing our stuff, as opposed to following what I'm assuming is supposed to be our primary character. She gets only a couple minutes of screen time.
Yep.
So then we're just left confused going into the last episode of what are we even doing? We are in dark about the plan, which then makes it less interesting going in.
Yep. Yeah, we barely see her in this one. What's so funny is that every time I think about this show, I think of all of a sudden 5 or 6 more backstory, plot detail stakes that I wasn't even thinking about. There's the whole Valia backstory with her being a Harkonnen and her with Harrow. We forgot about that. I forgot about that. There's just so much. And that is a really interesting one too. What are they going to do with that? Because she's clearly still on her home planet. So she's doing something there. We don't know what yet, but she's got a plan related to him somehow, and the shape-shifting somehow.
Yeah. And the imprinting.
Yes.
And now we got Lila with dead people taking her over. So that's cool. That can be fun.
Which is apparently the key to the Imperium. So, we also need to get her onto the throne and protect her.
Yeah.
I forgot about her half the time.
Yeah, she didn't get a lot of focus in this episode either.
Not much.
Yeah, there's too much happening.
Yeah.
So we'll see what happens in the final episode and what they choose to focus on.
Yep. We will see. All right. Well, this was our episode and discussion about Dune Prophecy. Episode 5 is available to stream on Max. Thank you for listening to today's episode of TV and Us. Our name sums it up. We're big fans of TV and the powerful ways we can connect with each other and the world around us. This podcast is about all of us and our shared stories, so everyone is welcome here, and we're so glad you spent time with us today as we continued our journey through Dune Prophecy. You can subscribe to this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you tune into your favorite shows. Drop us a rating and review letting us know your thoughts about episode 5. You can connect with us on Instagram, Threads, and TikTok at tvnspod, or email us at tvnspod@gmail.com. We will be back next week to discuss the finale for Dune Prophecy. We hope you have an amazing week, and we'll talk again with you very soon.